welcome to the Inspired Riding Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Lauren Parrish. As a certified riding instructor, remote coach, and animal communicator, I bridge the gap between your inner and outer worlds as you strive to enhance all aspects of your riding. I'm here to remind you that you are powerful and more than capable of changing your reality with your horse time. In this podcast, I had the privilege to interview Dr. Penny Hawken. Penny is a scientist with a vision to combine the world of science with natural therapies to help our dogs and horses to live their best life. After loving horses for as long as she can remember, her life path initially took her towards vet science, but the universe had other plans, and she directed her love of science towards agriculture, which in turn led her to a PhD in animal science and a dream job in research and teaching in Australia. During her PhD, she reconnected with her childhood love of horses, and finding a horse to ride came only second to finding a house. After 16 years living in Australia, her life path has taken many twists and turns, but it was meeting her heart horse Midnight back in 2007 that led her on a journey to start her own business and trust her conviction, abilities, intuition, and unique understanding to create nutritional supplements that literally change lives. I'm so excited for you to hear this interview, and here we go. And welcome, Penny. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm a really big fan of the podcast. I really enjoy listening to it when I'm out walking my dog. I find I get a lot of inspiration and insight from it. So I am so thrilled to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So I'm going to start out with an icebreaker. What would be a superpower that you would love to have and why?
I would love to be able to fly. I think I always really I'm actually afraid of birds, which is the level of phobia that sort of people have with spiders and snakes. That's like me with flying things and bats and birds and so on. So it's kind of strange that I would want to fly, but I think ever since as a little kid I had a very vivid imagination. I always dreamed of just soaring above the trees like an eagle, just being able to look down and just take everything in that's going on below you, in stealth mode, sort of in secret, just absorbing from above. I think that would be amazing.
I love that, the drone Penny flying around.
Yeah.
Awesome. So please share with me what lights up for you for your career.
Well, I kind of have, I originally started off, for as long as I can remember, as a small child, I loved animals. I was absolutely obsessed with animals, horses especially. And I'm from the UK, and so living in the UK, my parents were never in a position to be able to essentially really pay for riding lessons, or certainly not give me a pony. And having land or owning a horse in the UK is really something that's only for very, very rich people. And I was, one of three kids, and my parents were always really balanced with wanting to make sure that everything was done fairly. So I had this absolute horse obsession. I would sit in my oversized jodhpurs we got from a secondhand shop with my little, knitted jumper that had a horse on it with this little woolen mane, and I would sit there reading pony magazines, and I wrote stories, and every story was always about a girl and her pony. And I just literally memorized every point of the horse, every color of the horse, every breed of the horse. I couldn't get enough information. And so it ended up taking me on a journey almost outside of my sort of, whatever you'd say, personal decision making, to become a vet. And it was mainly because I loved animals and I was really good at schoolwork. So academia was just really my thing. And I ended up kind of on this road of going, well, you know, you love animals and you're smart, so you're going to be a vet. And along that journey, it really kind of took me on an interesting kind of journey where I ended up getting to a point where that just wasn't going to happen. My grades just weren't like, I needed a grade in chemistry, which I didn't have, and I felt that I'd done everything that I could. And prior to that, I'd done a lot of work experience in every possible avenue that, you know, you could imagine, from milking cows to, you know, working in a cat rescue and horse rescue, and just basically anything I could get my hands on. I worked in a vet's. And whilst I was working in this vet practice, if I worked with one of the vets, I was fine. He was a very kind, kind of quiet guy. But if I worked with one of the other vets, basically anytime there was sort of anything involving blood or, you know, kind of like any sort of pressure, I pretty much had what I now kind of look at was probably a panic attack. I would basically almost black out. And so felt like I was kind of on this journey of going to try to become a vet, and I wasn't actually sure that I could physically, mentally, or emotionally handle it. And when I look back at it now, I think, you know, being very connected with the animals in a very kind of empathetic way, it was sort of like being in a self-driving car, and you don't know how to stop it, you know, because everybody expected that of me, that I was smart. So, and I loved animals, and so I was going to be a vet. And eventually, at one point, after my kind of studies, I made a decision to stop. So I basically had another interview at one of the vet schools. I'd got all this work experience lined up with the zoo, go and do all this amazing, you know, work at the zoo, which would have been amazing. And I was going to go to ag college to apply, you know, the kind of get the large animal experience, and they still rejected me. And by that point, I kind of looked at it and I was like, the universe is trying to tell me something here. This is not my path. And so I made that decision to just stop, you know, and it was a very, very difficult decision to make, because I felt this like weight of expectation on my shoulders. But once I made that decision and had that lifted, other than dealing with having to tell everybody, no, I'm not going to be a vet. No, I'm not going to be a vet. And a guy I actually worked with when I was working in like one of the retail stores, I still think to this day he thinks I'm a vet. I just gave up telling him that was not what I was doing anymore, because he just kept going, oh yeah, you know, and I was just like, yeah, whatever. So in the end, I made a decision. Like I loved my science, my biology and chemistry, and I basically looked at it, and I was already signed up to go to agricultural college. And I thought, you know what, I really like that. I like the application of something to something that really matters. You know, that you've got agriculture where essentially you're feeding the world. You've got the welfare of all those farm animals, you know, that needs to be enhanced and optimized. And that's what took me in the direction of agriculture. And really, I never looked back from there. And that was then how I ended up with a job here in Australia, working in animal science research. And really what kind of has always driven me is that desire to help and to learn and to understand. And those things are all the kind of like the main drivers in what gets me out of bed in the morning, essentially. But it is interesting that we can be on paths, and they can change direction, but sometimes they're changing direction because of something that's deep within us that is actually going, you know, this is not your purpose, which is, again, I was saying, this podcast I was listening to was talking about like, why are we here? You know, what is your purpose in life? And I feel that my purpose in life is to help and to educate and to share, you know, my knowledge, my understanding, my insight, and to connect with people and with animals. And that's pretty much what I do on a daily basis nowadays. So I'm very, very fortunate. I'm very lucky.
That's beautiful. Can you talk me through like a typical day for you?
So my days are pretty crazy because I have two small boys, Michael and Harry. So they are 3 and 5 years old. So they are either sort of in school or daycare, but a big part of my making the decision to step away from academia and focusing on developing my own business was having that ability to structure my life around them and around the horses, which is very much a work in progress. So I don't want anyone to think that it's easy, because it definitely isn't. But basically my kind of day is, we get up, we feed the horses. We live on a 5-acre property, so the boys love the horses. They come out to help with feeding, and they're very aware of what's going on with the horses. They have a little pony. We let Maverick out straight away, so he's our border collie, who's pretty intense. So he comes out and rounds the horses up for me, much to their disgust. But they're very tolerant of him, thank goodness. So basically I usually feed the horses, get the boys on their way to daycare or to school if it's a work day for me. And then basically I start usually working on filling any orders for our products. So it was a few years. So I worked in academia for a total of about 13 years. But about 8 years into that journey, basically my luck ran out. And that was when I started looking at starting my own business. And prior to this time, I was always researching what remedies could help my horses and other people's horses. And I had a couple of friends who would always come to me and they'd be like, my horse is doing this, what should I do? And I'd go away and I'd have a look and I'd have a think and I'd come back with some things. And a friend of mine, Annie, she was a big advocate for me with starting my business, because I was so filled with fear. I was absolutely terrified of what if this, what if that, And was so, I myself experienced, so afraid of failure. And a lot to her sort of support, she was like, just do it. And so I kind of, took a step back and started to look at this situation and go, at this point we didn't have kids. So I thought, what am I going to, what is my life going to look like? What do I want to do? So during my last sort of probably 3-4 years of working at the university, I was also working in parallel with growing my business, which is my alternate touch, basically supplements for horses. And we also have a couple of products for dogs. And really that's now kind of become my primary focus. And so when I get up, I go and I tinker away in the shed making products, sending those out to people, spending lots of time on social media, doing all the things that we need to do to help to get our brand out there and our name out there. And still every time, when I get someone come back, and when you actually know that you can make a difference to so many horses that I never even get to meet. And sometimes people will send me photos or they'll send me testimonials, and they're often people that have been dealing with lifelong issues. And then they can be like, well, it's a completely different horse. I've got my horse back. We're out competing again. We're enjoying our lives together again. They're so much happier. They're so much calmer. They're so much more themselves. And, as you find, with training, to be able to give that gift to someone with their horse, to get that back, especially if it's something that they've lost or something that they've not yet got because the horse might have come from a bad place. Really, that has to be the main kind of driver, So it's certainly an ever evolving experience for me. But I would like, my kind of vision is I would like to get the research actually done on our products, because having that, again, like for me, as coming from a science background, is really important. And it would be really great to be able to quantify that. Also, because that would actually allow the products to go out to help those horses that really, really need them, like basically within the racehorse industry. So to be able to offer, a non-pharmaceutical alternative to those horses that are under so much pressure, and actually make a difference to them on a day-to-day basis would be like, that would be a legacy that would be amazing to leave behind.
Oh yes, anything to help the racehorses would be amazing. They do go through
Yeah.
stuff. I worked a lot with retraining them to help them become happy riding horses, and it is quite the process. Do you
Yeah.
have any specific success story that comes to mind that you'd like to share?
I had this one of the first, not sort of first clients, but kind of it's quite a big client who's a very big advocate of our products, and has been for sort of 4 or 5 years now, that this guy consistently uses them. He invited me up to visit the horses. So originally when I started the business, it was called Alternate Touch because I am very much about taking a holistic approach to everything. So, as you know, even with a trainer, when you meet a horse, you might have the person saying to you, this horse has a sore back or a sore foot. But when you meet them, there's a whole raft of other things that's going on. Often there's some nutritional imbalances or a mineral deficiency, or there's something going on with their feet, their body, they're particularly anxious or tense, or they're carrying trauma from their past. And so what I would find was that I was like, I want to be able to go in and have lots of tools essentially in my toolbox to be able to help those horses. But what I found was that as I kind of went on and I started going out and, kind of finding my feet and meeting people's horses, was that I'd be like saying, I'd basically almost come up with a list of saying, okay, so you need to give your horse X, Y, Z. And it was just, for most people, like, they're just like, oh, that is just way too much for me to deal with. And so this one kind of fateful day, I was working with these two big, beautiful horses, and the lady said to me, can't you just give me a bar or something? And I was like, that's a really good idea. So my husband was working away at the time, and I came back home and I was using this combination of ingredients, anti-inflammatory and antioxidant ingredients, to help my horse Midnight, who was in this 3-year rehabilitation recovery, which was basically the inspiration behind my whole business. And I knew that this particular combination of ingredients was really amazing. Like, my horse Midnight, he'd gone from being a thoroughbred, you're used to seeing them hooning around the paddock constantly. And I hadn't seen him canter over for his breakfast in over 1.5 years at that point. And he was sort of semi-okay, but it was a very, very long process. And within a week of me using this kind of combination of sort of turmeric, rosehip, and MSM, which is this methyl sulfonyl methane, freshly crushed linseed for the omega-3s. So I was mixing all that through his feed. And then within that about week, suddenly, all of a sudden, one day I went out and he came cantering over for his breakfast. And I was like, yes, that is like so good. And so that was kind of my first bar. So I just went and got these little mini muffin containers from, one of the local stores. And I made up this mix. And I thought, like, are they going to eat it like this? Because it's got turmeric, it's got pepper in there. Like, seriously, they're going to eat it. So I put a bit of splosh of molasses in there and mixed it up with some other stuff, these like pellets that I crushed up that I knew that they really like. And so I made this bar, and I went outside. Once I'd made it up, I kind of put them in the fridge to sort of chill out and just solidify a little bit. Took it out, and I had my two horses out in the paddock, and I offered it to them. And they both said, thank you very much. Yum, 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 yum. Ate that up, looking for more.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And so from there, my husband was really like, he was really funny, because he was like, don't tell anybody about this. Do not tell anyone. I think this is a really good idea, and I think someone's going to steal your idea.
Oh my goodness.
And so for a while, it was really a conspiracy theorist. So for a while, I kind of kept things to myself while I kept, just working away and researching. And like I said, I'm a lot about basically, as a researcher, it's quite interesting because, I change disciplines over the course of my, kind of decade in research, from basically from reproductive physiology through to stress biology, neurobiology. And what you learn is you can almost research anything if you have a basic understanding of the science. So the whole principle behind the ingredients in my bars is it's looking at the natural therapies that people swear by. You know, you go on these horse forums and people go, oh, you know, do this, do that. Oh, I swear, I swear, I swear. But really, you know, it's just hearsay, you know. And so what I did was I started to really look at the processes and how things fit together and what pathways they work through and how they could complement each other. And so now, you know, I have a range of probably about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 different bars, and it's kind of like, it's all based on that. Generally, there's a reason why the ingredient is there, based on something that's in the scientific literature. But going back to sort of the journey with this first bar, eventually I was going to a polocrosse carnival. So this was sort of pretty early days. And I took my bars with me and I was like, right, I'm going to try and get some of these polocrosse people to try them with the horses. Let's see if the horses.
Polocrosse, is that what you said?
Yeah, polocrosse. You have polocrosse in the US, don't you? Yeah.
It's not as popular, I think, as where you are, but yes, I have.
It's not. Yeah.
I just want to clarify for anyone who is listening. So, yeah.
Yes, people often, even when I first started, I called it cola. Like the guy I was talking to, who actually owned Midnight, he kept saying polocrosse, and I kept correcting him and saying polo. And he was like, no, polo cross, it's a completely different sport. And I was like, oh, okay. So but I took the bars along, and I was sat with the people in our club, and I kind of said, look, you know how your horses, because often what happens with polocrosse is it's a very intense sport. And so the horses, basically the games that you play on a Saturday will determine whether or not you go into the finals on a Sunday. And so your horse can be going really great on the Saturday, but then run out of steam on the Sunday for the final, which is when you actually, want to have the horse at tip-top condition. So the principle of these particular bars, they're called recovery bars. So they're really good for recovery during competition, but they're also good for recovery from injury. And they're kind of, I tend to call them like a kind of Swiss Army knife of a bar, because they've got lots of different applications. But I managed to convince kind of 3 or 4 of the people in our club to give them to the horse on the Saturday night and the Sunday morning. So we went over and we see if the horses would eat them. Some of them will, some horses are very suspicious and don't want to take things out your hand anyway, but they would eat it in the feed bin. Anyway, they all ate the bar. And the following morning, went out and watched them playing. And these horses were like, they were just pinging, but in a good way. Yeah, the difference that you could see and feel, the people riding could feel how much better the horse had felt. And it's kind of like, I sort of say, when you play polocrosse, like on a Saturday night, you're really feeling it. Like you feel sore, and you get up on the Sunday morning, and it's like, our horses, even when they're very fit and well conditioned, they're still going out there, they're working really hard, they're getting bashed around, because they ride other horses off and so on. And so just giving them that extra support for their muscles and their joints and helping to limit any muscle damage actually happening just means that when it comes to that Sunday game, or when it comes to, training the following weekend, because, it's quite a heavy calendar, is that you can keep the horse basically in a better space physically, which then also takes away some of that staleness, where they're kind of like, oh, are you serious? We have to go and, train again. So that for me was a real kind of light bulb moment of going, yes, this does work. And yes, this will make a difference.
So they just had 1 bar in the evening and 1 bar in the morning, and they had that beautiful result. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and the bars, some need to be fed like kind of more consistently. So our digestion bars are the ones that were the real game changer for me with Midnight. So one of Midnight's primary issues was that he had gastric ulcers, but we didn't realize that. So this was around about when he was 8 years old, and he was so hot and so fast and he was very well educated horse, so he knows the confines of what to play. And so at this point we were so we just my friend just thought it was me having a hot seat and being a bit nervous, and combination of horse and rider and so on. And at that point we thought his back was stuffed. So I went through, I don't know how many saddles, and his back was permanently coming up sore. And I was getting Bowen therapy done on him every 2 weeks. He would basically have the Bowen therapy. He would get a little bit better, and then he would go downhill again very quickly. And so pretty much we were at the point of going, we're just going to have to retire him from playing polocrosse, aged 8 years old. And then I had this guy who was a Chinese medicine expert. He came around and was treating a different horse. This guy, unfortunately, he's Dr. Bruce Ferguson. He's passed away now. May he rest in peace. Just a wonderful, wonderful person who really introduced me to the idea of food as medicine, and also the power of Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And so he treated this other horse, and I was so impressed and so fascinated by this guy. And I was like, maybe you might be able to give me some insight into Midnight, and maybe you could come back and do a treatment with him, explain about his back. And so he said, yeah, sure. And he didn't even he has, a little cotton sheet on, and I brought him out the paddock and said that he didn't even take his cotton sheet off, and he said he has stomach ulcers. And he introduced me to the sort of acupressure points that can be indicative of, digestive issues. And Midnight was so reactive. The one through his back, basically, you touch it, which for anyone who's not familiar, it's kind of near that last rib, and he would basically break in half. Like he looked, And so Bruce came back and saw Midnight another time, basically. But from that point, he said to me, okay, I want you to give him aloe vera gel. I want you to take out his grain, and to do this, to do that. Give me a couple of things to do. But the main one was giving him aloe gel every day. And and then he came back and saw him and did some acupuncture with him. And he said, from a musculoskeletal perspective, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this horse. So even though we thought it was his back at that time point, it wasn't at all. And I said to him, but why did the Bowen therapy, which is the type of kind of massage for anyone who doesn't know, why did that help? Because it did help. And he was like, the analogy he gave was like, well, it's like when you have, your period. Obviously, as a man, he must be quite insightful, but he's like, if you have your period and someone gives you a back massage, it makes you feel a little bit better, but it doesn't stop the cramps in your stomach. So it'll make you feel a little bit better for a little bit, but it's not addressing the actual problem that's causing that. Yeah. So from there, we gave Midnight a month off. And by the end, and I have some before and after photos on our website, because the before photos I have of Midnight, I actually took of him because he was looking so much better than he had done, because I was using this various kind of oils and stuff. But after a month, he just blossomed, and we took him into the round yard to ride him. And my friend who owned him at that point, he was just absolutely blown away. He was like, I have not seen him move like that since he was first broken in. He was a completely different horse. He was so soft and just so responsive. It was just amazing. But what I found over the course of that journey was I was giving him aloe vera gel for years and years and years. I don't know how many years, but a lot of years. If I missed a dose, he went downhill. He still was never really 100%. I had to be very, very careful what I fed him. He still didn't eat very well when we went away to carnivals, but he was a lot better, and I didn't need so much gear to ride him, and he was a lot better. But once I kind of started on this journey with the bars, and I started to look at it and go, okay, so let's have a look at the situation, within the digestive tract as a whole. What's there with, like I said, within the science of what makes a difference to these kind of natural therapies. So what I ended up with was a combination of ingredients that helped to reduce the stomach acid One of them contains some stuff which is called chitin, and the chitin kind of works to form like a protective sort of coating over sort of any lesions that are present, which is a sort of remedy taken from Chinese medicine again. They've got ingredients there to promote healing, and to reduce inflammation, to support the good bacteria, to reduce any bad bacteria, and they just work. If they work well for the horse, it's just amazing. You know, the quickest one I had was a guy messaging me after 2 days and saying, you know, I don't believe in magic, so I'm going to give you the credit, because the horse had gone from being like a snapping crocodile to just so at peace, you know. And it's like, what a lot of people, I think, don't realize is they sometimes don't realize what they have, the horse that they have underneath them. Because if that horse has some underlying issues, whether they are in their digestive tract, whether they are emotional, if they can kind of connect with the horse and resolve those issues, the kind of the physicality of it, then it gives you a place to stand to work on your connection. But trying to create that meaningful connection and relationship with a horse who is in so much pain or carrying so much trauma is
really
nigh on impossible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we find is, like I tend to say, you know, with the digestion bars, they're very good for just restoring and kind of rebalancing the digestive tract as a whole. And then prevention. You know, what a lot of people don't realize is from the minute that you go above a walk, you know, your horse's stomach contracts, the pH, you know, plummets, becomes more acidic, and the horse's stomach is at risk. And they're starting to only, like literally in publications only published in like 2020, they're exploring, they still don't really understand ulcers that occur in the glandular part of the stomach, which is the part where the acid is produced. They don't understand the pathology, so the way that they're caused. They've kind of made a distinction that they are different from the other type of ulcers that are caused by splash of acid, which is something we're much more familiar with. But the ones in the other part of the stomach, they don't respond very well to the normal medications. They don't understand fully how they're caused. They see a strong relationship with stress, and how the animal handles stress. But in terms of learning how to protect our horses from them and how to resolve them, like I said, publications even from even from last year, they just don't really know. So, you know, for the work that you do, you know, creating that environment where you're reducing the stress for the horse is so important, because you don't want to end up with a horse with these glandular ulcers where even the scientists, even the people who are on the front line of research, are still really baffled as to what to do with them and how to reduce them. So it comes back again to really taking that holistic approach, that mind, body, and soul, you know, protection, prevention, you know, preparation, and connecting with the horse, so that you're very aware of what's going on for them.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. So it's kind of segues to my next question. How have you used intuition with your career and or with your horses?
I think I've always been much more intuitive and very much empathetic from a very, very young age. I was very insular and very, very shy as a child, to the point where I have this memory of being like curled up in a corner in our dining room, pretending to be invisible, because I actually thought I was invisible. And it's a very kind of strange thing. And you work through a lot of those kind of like childhood experiences where you're going, what was that what was that doing? Where was that directing me? Where was that taking me? And I very much, I loved magic and imagination, and just kind of like, all I wanted to do was just be with the horses. And that's what I have to remind myself, as we get so consumed, like I do, with, your day-to-day life, that you're looking back at it and you're going, now I have everything that I ever wanted. I have two beautiful horses that I could go and do whatever I want with. They're sitting there, and that's all I ever wanted as a child. And I think that being a scientist with intuition is a really interesting combination, because people tend to think of scientists as very black and white. But I don't aspire to black and white. And I very much look at I kind of use the science to guide, and then the intuition to confirm. So whenever I was developing a new product, Midnight was often my kind of tester, and I would go out and I would be like, just basically communicating with him and saying, well, what do you think? Or looking at him and looking at the changes in him. And, when you take a step back to allowing that and actually trusting that, it's really very powerful. And so, like, one of our products is a calming bar. So when I first got my other horse, Gosh, at this point in my life, I had completely lost all confidence, like, as in I could literally barely get on a horse. So when Midnight had his big accident, he came back into work. I went against my intuition. I felt there was still something really wrong with him. But everybody told me he was fine. And, with polo cross, it's like, get back, get going, train him, get him back, getting fit, blah, blah, blah. And anyway, I was at a clinic at a friend's place, and he was actually going very nicely. And then just literally out of the blue, he just cat leapt into the air out of nowhere. So I wasn't even properly holding onto the reins. So I tipped back on his back, and he started bucking, which he never bucked with me on his back. So he bucked and bucked. I fell off. I was holding the reins. He span around and kicked me in the head. And thank heavens I was wearing a helmet, or I probably wouldn't be. I don't think I would be sitting here today. And from there, he came up with all this swelling, this swelling all around his flanks and around his stifles. And I took him to the vet, and the vet explained what had happened. And the vet said he thought he'd been stung by a bee. And I was like, I don't think so. And I looked at all this swelling, and, they gave him some antihistamines and sent us on our way. But it took 6 months for that swelling to go down.
Oh, wow.
And and I still to this day don't really understand quite what it was. But that took me on a journey into basically looking into using a cold laser to work on this swelling. It took me into learning about essential oils. And so I learned a lot of things. I suppose having confidence in my intuition came through working with Midnight, because I would do these bodywork sessions with him, and I developed this like an anti-inflammatory comfrey ointment to use on him when I was doing bodywork, because I'd find there were certain parts where he was too sore to do the movements that I wanted him to do to basically help him through the process. And so he was, he would tell me, he'd be like, yeah, this is good, and once we got to a point where physically he seemed to be better, I started trying to put the saddle on him, and we were both terrified, literally kind of handshaking, terrified. And I could tell that he was afraid that it was going to hurt or something was going to happen. And that was part of really kind of working through and connecting using essential oils. So I used a couple of emotional blends for surrender and acceptance, as well as balancing and grounding. And we got the right combination, you know, that he really likes sheepskin. And so it was kind of like, okay, but still, once I'd put the saddle on, he would plant all 4 feet in the ground and just freeze. He was terrified. And so it took quite a lot of working through that. Eventually we got through all of that, but really, like, I think it works in both ways, because I often kind of use my intuition to direct me towards certain things, to research the ins and outs of those things, to then help me to decide if I think that that's going to be a good fit. But then as well, looking and just working through and looking at the horses and seeing their reactions, because horses don't lie and horses don't believe in placebos. And if a horse has a certain reaction, and if you consistently see that reaction in different horses, you know, that helps you to reaffirm that it is actually doing what you think it might be doing. But eventually with Midnight, we really, those oils were as much for me as they were for him. But eventually I got to a point where I was really directed, and this one sort of really came through intuition, to using frankincense down his spine. And I just had this, I was kind of like directed towards some sort of nerve impingement, which is what I, to this day, believe what happened when he bucked. So the original injury that he had, he got the gate off its hinges, and looked like he'd broken his leg. And so I think that there was some sort of nerve issue, and that was what caused him to just have that sudden reaction. So I did a week of putting frankincense down his spine. He really liked that. You know, I felt good about doing it. And then from there, we just worked with the sheepskin and putting the saddle on, and yeah, the problem's resolved. So I think that trusting or allowing yourself to be guided by your intuition, and not being afraid to be afraid. I was
not being afraid to be afraid. That is huge. Yeah.
And because I was talking to over Instagram with another one of our friends from Melody's group. She's in Canada, I can't remember her name, but we were talking about this whole issue of actually allowing yourself to be honest with the horse, because we're often kind of like, you know, people have that thing of, oh, don't let them walk all over you, and make sure you're standing up and being a strong leader, and don't show any fear, and don't, you know, it's like, how can you expect them how can you expect them to be honest with you if you're not being honest with them and not being honest with yourself? So
exactly.
You know.
I remember reading your recent post and how you just started saying exactly how you felt in the moment, and Midnight's like, yeah, I got you, right? Did you want to elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, it was so one of my problems, like now, kind of after having kids, and people had always said this to me, like when I was pregnant with Michael, who's our first son, Belinda, who's my friend, and she's a trimmer, a hoof trimmer, and a nutritionist and an endurance rider. She's just such an inspiring person. And she said to me, she was like, you know, like life's going to change, you know, it's all going to go downhill from here. And I was like, no, it'll be fine. But what people, I think, like people always say it, they say, you know, once you have kids, it's like this, it's like some sort of switch goes, and kind of this whole sort of self-preservation thing comes to the fore, as well as the never-ending mum guilt of, you know, I should, you know. So I struggle with this, you know, kind of perpetual to-do list. And gosh, my other horse, he in many ways is like, he was the horse that got me back on the horse, really, because I was very broken when I found him. But because I was that broken when I first got him, even though he was very spooky and frightened on the ground, and he'd basically been used like pretty much like not so much like a machine is probably a bit too harsh, but he was used to just do your job, this is your job and you will do it. And he was quite a sad chap.
His feelings weren't considered.
No, and when I first got him, he was very sore. And I was in my sort of round yard at our old property doing some body work with him, and I was trying to get him to kind of release his neck. And I was just talking to him, and I was like, come on, you just gotta trust me. It's gonna help. It's gonna help. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, I don't trust Easy. And it just brought like tears to it literally made me cry. And I just was like, don't worry, mate, I've got you. You can trust me. I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you. But in some respects, like, when you reflect on things, under saddle, he was like, because he was so well educated and so that kind of almost machine like, he would like under saddle, you felt very safe. Mm-hmm. So it was like he made me feel safe under saddle, and I made him feel safe on the ground. And together, we spent like 6 months just literally working on the ground together, because I wasn't ready to ride. And really, he wanted that. He needed that as much as I did. So once we then did actually start riding together, that was really just, we didn't kind of look back. So I've always felt safe with him. And it's not that I, like, basically once I got to that kind of point with Midnight, it's like, he's there going to me, look, everything's fine now. Like, seriously, he's like, you've got to let it go. But I'm still like, they're going, oh, well, you remember when this happened? And like, are you sure everything's okay? And he's like, so I tend to find that I have a very busy life, I have a very busy schedule. So if I'm trying to prioritize going like, right, I want to go and have a ride, I have a whole long list of things that I want to do to make that ride kind of perfect, like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to make sure I've got time. And so I don't have time to do any of those things. Like, 2 small boys and a property and a house and a crazy border collie. It's just, So the other day I was really thinking about it, and I was like, right, we're just gonna ride. I'm just gonna saddle up and we're gonna ride. And it's just gonna be super calm and quiet and no pressure. And so I got him out the paddock and brought him over and gave him a good brush and so on, and saddled him up. So my husband's inside with the kids, so I kind of was like, yep, I've got time, we'll just take it easy. And my biggest thing is kind of the actual process of just actually getting on, because of feeling worried that he's going to do something once I hit his back, essentially. So once we're through that point, and then I really just like kind of just walking and being like, because so much of my riding confidence and ability came from playing polocrosse, I'm so used to this sort of riding where it's like, job. You're going to do this and you've got to ride from here to here and you've got to work on this and you've got to work on your fitness and your cardio and your da. And I was like, well, I have to kind of let all that go, because that's a different, we're in a different space now. We're in a different place.
Yeah.
So I just kind of got on, and I was talking to him about the saddles. So I was using a different saddle, and I was like, again, using your intuition. I was like, I think you prefer this saddle. And he was like, yes, I do. And I was like, okay, right, that's good. And then I was like, okay, well, I might need to, I can use this saddle for our day-to-day stuff, but if we're going out on a trail ride, I'm probably going to use the other saddle because it helps me to feel a bit safer. Is that okay with you? And he's like, yeah, that's okay. And I was like, okay, right. And then I was like, well, I've got a different joint supplement for Gosh, because he's a bit older. I was like, what do you think about it? And he was like, yeah, it's okay. He's like, but I prefer the turmeric and the rosehip. And I was like, okay, all right, well, I'll change yours back then. And he's like, yeah. And then I was just kind of like filling him in. I was saying, what do you think about putting a gate out the back so we can go and ride out on the trails? And he was like, yeah, I think he said it was like anything that helps you to get in the saddle. He was like, it's fine by me. I was like, okay. And then I said, but then he kind of interjected and he was like, yeah, but I don't want to go on my own. I don't want to go on my own, not yet. And I was like, okay, all right. So again, sometimes I think our intuition it's like using our intuition to kind of ask the right questions, but also not be afraid of the answers that we get, and listening and respecting to those answers, and not letting other people's opinions, you know, turn around and be like, well, you should, you know, should is such a dangerous word in many ways.
Yeah.
But then I'd kind of been like, just, you know, just talking out loud to him. And then I just kind of like frivolously almost said to him, I was like, well, is there anything you'd like to tell me? And I just got this really strong sense of, you know, everything's going to be okay. And like my eyes just like instantly just filled up, and it was just like almost like a wave of emotion kind of just like washed over me. And I was like, okay, yeah, everything will be okay. And like I mentioned before, you know, then I got kind of directed from, you know, a random Facebook post to a podcast today that was talking again about this whole kind of thing of going, we spend so much time in, like I do, I'm so consumed with fear and worry and anxiety, and it's just like, you know, everything is going to be okay, whatever happens. Like this guy had been in hospital and was having, you know, cardiac issues, and he was like, you know, everything's going to be okay. Like even if I die, everything's still going to be okay. Coming back to that point of going, you know, like allowing our horses to share that kind of with us, you know, really is such a blessing. And actually just being in the moment with them, and not like, because I tend to be, you know, thinking, oh, you know, I need to do this, need, you know, so just kind of allowing that direction to go, okay, you know, just be here, be now. And even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes of walking around the paddock, then that's okay. And that's what it is, you know, and that's a start, because we all have to start somewhere. So really for me, it's kind of rebuilding that, prioritizing that time with them and integrating them into my life around, you know, the businesses and my kids and everything else and all the excuses and so on. But yeah, so they're both very, very special horses. So I'm very blessed.
They sound amazing. And I'm so glad that you found that you can be at peace and allow them to give you that calm feeling, and find those little short and sweet sessions that are really profound. And once you slow down and really accept them for what they are, then the horses can feel relief and know, okay, mom's not in a rush. She's not going to ask for too much. This is really nice. We could have a full-on conversation, and then she's going to honor what I say. I mean, that's huge. If all horse people could do that, what a change would come to the horse world, right?
Yeah, I think I often find that everybody wants to go everywhere in a big rush, you know, and that's where, you know, I look at it, you know, from my perspective of my alternate touch business, is that if I can put tools and provide people with tools and strategies, knowledge and understanding of how they can kind of protect and support their horse at the same time as helping them to get the goals, you know, that they want to achieve. Because like I said before, people often don't realize what the horse could be like. So certainly, you know, in polocrosse, you see so many horses who are incredibly talented, but they are very they can be very sad and very shut down. And you look at it and you go, imagine if they weren't, you know, if they're that talented when they're potentially in a bit of a state of you know, high stress and maybe discomfort. Imagine if that stress and discomfort wasn't there. So with Midnight, you know, I mentioned earlier on before, where, you know, when I used to play him and he had all this gear on, and, you know, he was so hot and so strong and so just like all the time. And once I had used the digestion bars, and I now have like an elixir that basically you give to them before you ride. And what it does is it's a bit like a kind of like a horsey Gaviscon. So it reacts with the acid and makes like a jelly, like a float, you know. And so it helps the horse to feel much more comfortable when they're being ridden. So even when you are going at those higher speeds, or you're asking a lot of your horse, you're doing everything that you can to make them comfortable internally, and it makes a huge difference to the horse. But with Midnight, once we resolved, you know, the digestive side of things, now, you know, we have he just, I never used to be able to just trot in a circle without him. He would always feel like he was rushing to get away, you know. And I think, you know, on reflection, it was rushing from discomfort. And you know, I remember distinctly the first ride, once I'd kind of like had this realization, and he'd been through his bars, and we've kind of got all these things aligned, and I got back on him, and he was a completely different horse, completely different. So now we can go out trail riding, and he's often one of the calmest horses on the trail. He doesn't react to anything. We just can go cantering off up the path, and he's not racing and he's not rushing, and he just has a really nice natural self carriage. And I know that if that stops, or if that goes away, then I know that it's his guts, and there is something that I've done that I've kind of stuffed up. And so, like, for him, like knowing that and seeing that and feeling that as a rider, and so when you see other people, or you hear people's stories of the experiences that they're having, and often, you know, the horse might be trying really, really hard to not hurt the rider, and they're going, I really don't want to hurt you, I do not want to hurt you, but I can't control myself because they are in a lot of discomfort. And so, you know, for a lot of my perspective, it's really helping people to understand what's going on for the horse, whether it's from a digestive perspective or a mental or emotional perspective, and the power of being able to use these tools holistically, and then combining that with the type of training that you do, and, you know, good quality groundwork, and slowing things down. Because it's like, comes back to that whole thing of going, you know, and even reflecting on the race horses, like, can you imagine what the horse could do, you know, if they're actually optimized in a way that is really in tune with their whole body system. It's quite scarily exciting, you know, when you can see that, and when you see, and we've got I have a client who, she became one of our clients last year, and seeing her kind of excesses, she's an endurance rider, and seeing the transformation in her horse, and he's like just the physical transformation, but he's competing really well, and he's winning all these, you know, recognitions and acknowledgements. And one thing that was really exciting for me was a few years ago, was at the Polocross Nationals, which is, you know, obviously our national competition. And the one team within Western Australia that actually won their competition was the Masters women. And I think 6 or 7 out of the 8 players were all consistent users of my products in the lead up to the nationals. So that was so great to kind of know that you play a part in that. Like, obviously they're amazing players and have an amazing coach, but, you know, it's like the case of going, you can't play polocrosse if you don't have the horse, you know. So I think for all of us, it's looking at it and going, you know, as much as I really I love lots of, like, you know, sparkly things. Unfortunately, like I said, Midnight has very specific requirements in terms of his saddle pads, so I have to use what he wants. And Gosh is the same. He has a very specific, this is what I want. But I do look at it and I do think, you know, we spend so much money, certainly within polocrosse, you know, just traveling places, on our fees, our insurance, our, you know, competition entries, our coaches. You know, let's just take a step back and make sure the horse is right first, because otherwise it's like, really, is there that much of a point? It's like, if you start with the right foundations, you can go and have the best time together. And really, that's what it should be all about.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to something you mentioned in the beginning when you said when you were a child and you were trying to become invisible. I want you to think about something. So right now, what you do in your career is you're taking away the invisibility cloak off of the horses so you can see them clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's
it's like, yeah,
to help people see their horses and really see what they can become. And that's how I work with my students and the horses I work with. I can visualize what they can become together, and I keep that clear picture in my mind, and I watch them step into that with each session, and I remind them that it's possible, and then I invite them to think of it as well. So you're just doing the same thing, but with science and all these amazing supplements. I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah. And in this same podcast I was listening to this morning, the guy was talking about focusing on not focusing on where you are, but where you want to be. So that's that same thing of having that vision, because if you're just focusing on where you are right now, that's what keeps you where you are right now. But if you focus on where you can be, and your body and your mind will then drive you to actually get there.
Yeah.
And I think, I still get blown away sometimes when I see the transformations in people's horses. It still floors me. But it really is kind of like, it really is a gift to be able to share that and to just see the horses blossom. And often, like I said, go back to what they were, or to become, what they never thought they could be.
It's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Penny. How can people get a hold of you?
So they can get hold of me via Facebook. So my page is Alternate Touch Equine and Canine Supplements. I also have a website, which is www.alternatetouch.com. That has a contact us page. There's also lots of stories and kind of like our history, I suppose, or the inspiration behind our products. And I do write a blog, which is called our Science and Solutions blog, which is on the website, where I kind of delve into basically taking some of the science behind those kind of natural therapies or common problems that we deal with in our horses, and just bring that science to the everyday horse person. Because that's one of my other hats, is science communication. So it's actually one of those things where it's strange that the facets of your life that lead you to where you are, it can be a really interesting kind of dynamic, because obviously, I have this background in animal science and research and science communication, and also public speaking. So for many years I went from being a terrified public speaker to teaching people how to speak confidently in public, which is again something that helps me now to share this information with the world. So the world moves in mysterious ways, as they say.
I call it following the bouncing ball of the universe. And one of my favorite moments was a woman asking her son what he thought he might be when he got older. And he looked at her and said, "I don't think it's been invented yet."
I love that. That's awesome.
Like, wow, this kid's really tuned in. So, and that's really, you just never know what is going to happen next. And yet, if you keep sending out the vibration of love and appreciation and what's next, the most wonderful things can show up. So, yeah. And I'm very, very appreciative that you're next for my podcast.
It's a pleasure. My pleasure to be here today.
Well, thanks again. And I will definitely put in the show notes all of your contact information. And may the horse be with you always.
Wow, that was quite the interview. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you did, please go to the Apple Podcast and write a review. I would so appreciate that. Remember to lead with kindness for yourself and for your horse. Be sure to check out the website inspiredriding.com, and you can find more podcasts as well as insights and a free course on how to create a powerful bond with your horse. Thank you so much for listening, and may the horse be with you.